My name is Susan Sheridan, but you can call me Sue. I'm 37 years old, and among other things, I'm a wife. I'm a mum. I'm a PCT, which stands for Patient Care Tech, at a hospital where I work the night shift, 7 p.m. till 7 a.m., 3 nights a week. And I'm also an avid music fan. I have been to more rock concerts and pop concerts than most people have had hot dinners. I like books. I like many types of TV shows, from Cops to Catfish to The Great British Baking Show to Supernatural. I also like scary movies, and I've seen more scary movies than you might have thought had ever been made. I'm just an ordinary girl living in a sometimes crazy world. I've seen a lot of things in my life, but nothing and no one could ever have prepared me for what I saw and who I met just after I first started working at the hospital I still work at. Oh, and I love red velvet cake, but don't judge me, okay? Firstly, let me ask you a question. Do you believe in the supernatural? Do you believe in the existence of the paranormal? I was brought up to believe in that which I could not see, but whom I could feel within me, God. And yeah, I also always believed in the possibility of life after death, heaven, angels, and that the spirit of a person carries on after they die in some form or another. Do I believe in ghosts? We'll get to that. Why don't I start by telling you about where I work, what I do, and about some of my colleagues and about some of the patients whom I have met since I started working at my hospital. I would much rather not disclose the exact name, the exact whereabouts, the city, or even the state in which the hospital where I work at is located. But all you need to know is where I work is a very busy hospital. What I do can be very testing at times, to say the least. What I'm about to tell you and the experience that I had, which I'm going to describe to you in this story, is the God's honest truth. I'll have to change a couple of the names of some of my colleagues who either work at the hospital or worked at the hospital that I work at within the time frame of when this story is set, to safeguard their privacy any way that I can. However, one name I will not change, because that name is the name of the person who this whole tale all revolves around. But I'll introduce you to them as we go along. So, as I said, I work the night shift at the hospital where I work, which is also lovingly referred to as the graveyard shift, which, quite frankly, I do not mind it being called that because, from my experience, anything and everything can happen on it, even things that people in my profession would rather not disclose. Like I said, I am a patient care tech at a medium sized hospital, which has been known by many names over the years, which is responsible for all types of care. The hospital where I work is a place where all kinds of people visit with all kinds of problems and ailments that has seen many patients, doctors, nurses, CNAs, PCTs come through the main door, and some have made it out alive. Sorry, just a little joke. If there is one thing that I have learned from working night shift in several hospitals and care facilities, especially on night shift, I would say find a way to get through your shift any way that you can. And all that includes ways such as making jokes, accepting the true weird and the bizarre of humanity, however, in no way judging them, nor their sometimes uncontrollable conduct, and to distract yourself with work to make the time that you spend at work go quicker and smoother. 12 hours on a night shift can be hard, it can be long, it can feel never ending. But the patience that you have, the more that you find you don't have any opportunity to even watch the clock because you are so busy. Of course, there are days and there are nights in every place of work when there isn't as much to do as there normally is. When you find yourself on call and you must spend the entirety of your shift at home, awake, and awaiting to be called in to work when you are needed. Not fun, I can tell you. So, anyway, I'm a PCT, a patient care tech. And when I do get to work, and when I do actually get to do what I like doing, and when I do get to work with the colleagues whom I like working with, there are nights when I do thoroughly actually enjoy my job, especially when the patients who I am assisting are sweet, calm, and not screaming like a banshee. Uh huh. Let me tell you, banshees, you know, those creatures that you might have heard stories being told about around a campfire. Yeah, they exist. And how do I know? Because I have heard one. I have been literally deafened by one. And because I've had to care for a few people in my time as a patient care tech, that would definitely qualify as being a banshee. Because when they scream and after you hear them, you feel like your soul has left its body. And if you didn't have a migraine before you walked into a particularly loud patient's room, then you most definitely will afterwards. Working in a hospital, you get to see and you get to meet all kinds of people. But on the night shift, on the graveyard shift, let me tell you, what you see with your own eyes, you don't need to make up. Because most likely, everybody who is anybody who has worked where you work and who has at one time had to do what you do, they know what goes on and who and what is responsible. When I first started working at the hospital where I work, I instantly got along with everybody, and everybody instantly got along with me. People do naturally like me and find me to be very approachable and easy to talk to, mainly because, especially when I'm working and at the beginning of my shift, I don't say a lot. And when I do say something, I'm usually quiet when I speak. My nickname at work is Mouse. Why? Because my footsteps are as light as a feather, and I can sneak into patients' rooms and get vitals easily without fear of waking up any of the patients I am caring for. Of course, there are some people who cannot and will not sleep through the night no matter what. So usually it is the fellow insomniacs who I get to talk to face and administer care to while they're still awake. So now you know who I am. So now you know what I do, where I work, and what my responsibilities are, right? Well, you could also add pizza girl to my list of responsibilities. And what do I mean by that? Well, when it is that time of the night and when there is not as much to do as there is at other times, one of the things that I do expertly is go out and get pizzas for all the staff on my floor, the med surge floor of the hospital where I work. Not every night, but some nights around 10 p.m. when I'm at work, I leave the hospital and I head to the nearest pizza place to collect the pizza orders that have been phoned through ahead of time by the charge nurse of the floor that I work on. Yep, I get all the glamorous jobs. So, one night, like always, I stand up from my chair at the nurse's station. I pick up my purse, my mobile phone, and the list with who was supposed to get what pizza and with what topping written on it, and I head out to pick up the pizzas that the staff had ordered. I walk to the elevators. I push the down button in the elevator's control panel. However, then, when I look to my left and then to my right at the doors to the elevators that are next to one another, I see that both elevators have a sign on them that says they are out of order, meaning that the only way I was going to be able to get downstairs to my car so that I could pick up the pizzas would be to walk down the stairway to the back entrance of the hospital, because I knew that when I got back, the main entrance door would be closed unless there was an emergency. So, what did I do? I took the stairs and I made sure that I took my time as I did, because there was no way that I was rushing and potentially falling down the stairs, not even for pizzas, not even for Diet Coke, and that's saying something. So, I walked down the stairs, heading for the back entrance, and as I descended, I began to hear something, the unmistakable sound of someone crying. Naturally, I was startled, and I was also concerned about who might be in the stairway and why they might be crying. So I carried on descending the stairs while trying to locate and identify who might be the source of the crying that I heard. However, no matter how much I descended the steps, I saw no one at all. The stairs were dimly illuminated. However, I could see where I was going. That was as long as I was careful while stepping down to the steps that I had have faith were beneath me. Because in all honesty, I was more focused on discovering who was crying in the stairway. Was it a patient? Was it an employee? A fellow PCT from the emergency department, maybe? A nurse? It wasn't that I wanted to be nosy or anything about what was happening with whomever was noticeably in a state of distress in some way. Not at all. In fact, I was more interested in what I may be able to do for the person in need of some kind of support. I would generally help anybody or anything if they were in need, and I would never walk on by any situation which I felt like I could contribute something positive. So I carried on walking. I carried on walking. And I carried on walking. I carried on walking so much and so far, seemingly following the sound of the definite female voice that I heard and the sound of their tears that echoed all throughout the stairway, that I was still descending downwards. And so much so that I walked past the entrance exit of the stairwell that led to the back entrance and to the employee car park where I had parked my car at the beginning of my shift. Soon I reached the basement of the hospital, which turns out used to be a working floor of the hospital that was once brightly lit and had optimistic pieces of artwork on the walls, and the same artwork that remained upon the walls of the floors that were still being used. However, the floor that I now found myself being drawn to, and the one that I was walking down, was now dark. It was cold, and it appeared to have not had a patient or a nurse in it for months, perhaps years. I'd been working at the hospital for probably 5 months by then, and in all that time I had never once set foot down the corridors of this floor, nor took any notice of its existence. And now here I was, walking down a very eerie and a very spooky looking, darkly lit corridor, and following the sound of someone crying. I must have been mad, right? I walked down the darkly lit corridor as far as I could go. I looked in every patient room of the now abandoned looking floor. I even inspected the vending machine that was down there, and when I did, I discovered, to my surprise, that the vending machine was full of candy, potato chips, and bottles of beverages that were all still in date, which meant that this vending machine was still being filled on a regular basis. And to be honest, I was intrigued to know why this vending machine was full of anything at all, especially since no one had noticeably been down here in a very long time. However, there was the sound of the woman who I still heard crying. So, at the time, I figured that perhaps whomever it was that I heard, this was where they often came, and this was where they took their breaks. That was what I guessed at the time to be the reason why this vending machine was still here, illuminated, and full of available snacks to choose from and buy. By that time, I'd forgotten all about the pizzas that I was supposed to have picked up from the pizza place. And by the time I realised how much time I had spent following and searching for the source of the crying that I still heard, but could not locate, I was both hungry and thirsty. And that was why I decided to use the vending machine to get something to eat and to drink while I walked back up the abandoned corridor and former medical floor so that I could go and pick up the pizzas that the medical staff upstairs were no doubt waiting impatiently for and were no doubt wondering where I was. So I walked over to the fully stocked vending machine. And then I pulled out my billfold from my purse to get some money to put in the machine. I already knew what I was going to get: a bottle of Diet Coke and a Babe Ruth candy bar, something to raise my blood sugar levels, which I could tell that they were getting noticeably low because of me not eating anything for probably 7 hours by this point, and which had been only half of a pink lemonade Pop Tarts. I put a $5 bill into the vending machine, and I selected the Diet Coke and the Babe Ruth candy bar. Then I waited impatiently for my selections to drop down to the bottom of the vending machine so that I could retrieve them, which I did a few moments afterwards. Then I heard a sound, a thud. At first, I thought that it had come from the vending machine, but after a few seconds, I realized that I could no longer hear the crying that I had heard and the same voice that had led me to where I now was. I did not feel alarmed. In fact, I was more compelled to rip open the wrapper of the Babe Ruth and take a bite of it to raise my sugar levels more than anything, not to mention open the bottle of Diet Coke and take a long sip from it. That is probably why it took me a while to realize, as well as to hear, that there was someone walking down the corridor and approaching me from behind. In that moment, something told me to immediately turn around and see who it was who I heard approaching me. However, when I did turn around, I didn't see anybody, and I also no longer heard anybody either. I was confused. I felt dizzy, but that was most likely because my blood sugar levels were incredibly low at that point and were only just beginning to rise because of the bite of the Babe Ruth candy bar that I had only just recently consumed. My vision was noticeably blurry, and at times I believed that I did in fact see something or someone standing in the dim light of the corridor. But at that point, I believed that I was probably just seeing things and imagining that I saw something when there was nothing and no one to be seen. However, I did hear someone. I heard them loud and clear, and I knew for a fact that I felt drawn to where I was by something and by someone. But what? Who? Why? After a few more moments of standing and staring all around the dimly lit corridor, I finally regained some kind of semblance of clarity, and I instinctively felt this need to leave the corridor where I was, go back to the stairway, climb the stairs, and get to my car so that I could either go and get the pizzas that were being waited upon or perhaps go home. However, since I did not want to be fired for abandonment of my patients and my post or something like that, I decided that, if anything, I needed to go and get the pizzas and then get back to the hospital as soon as I could, and then return to the med-surg floor where I worked and where my colleagues were waiting for me. I believe that my colleagues were no doubt so concerned by my absence that they might believe that I had either been kidnapped or I had gone home, and they were probably going to be sending out a search party if I were gone any longer. In fact, I was surprised that no one had called me yet to see where I was and where their pizzas were. So, without wasting any more time, and as my level of unsettlement continued to rise, I walked at a fast pace to the stairway, and as quickly as I could, I ascended the steps of the stairway, and then I left the hospital via the back entrance exit, and I almost ran to my car in the car park. And then I went to the pizza place to retrieve the pizzas for everybody on the med-surg floor. I returned to the hospital. I entered through the back entrance exit. Then I walked up the stairway while attempting to keep the 4 pizzas that I was holding balanced. And then I returned to the nurses' station of the med-surg floor, and I gently placed the pizzas on the top of the desk near to where I sat when I entered the vitals of the patients into the computer system. And as I sat on my chair at my desk and at my computer terminal, I was genuinely still in a state of alarm and concern about what I believed I had heard and seen earlier in the dimly lit abandoned floor that I initially thought was the hospital's basement. Almost as soon as I sat down at the nurse's station, my colleagues were already swarming towards me and retrieving a slice of one of the pizzas that I had gone out and bought. However, not even uttering a word, nor inquiring where I had been, nor what had happened to me. I, however, was still in a state of unease, and I felt that I could not stay silent about what I had experienced when I had descended into the basement, abandoned floor of the hospital, which was why I seemingly randomly said in a low voice, "I heard something." And then, soon after, I saw something. "What?" said Darlene. Her name is not Darlene, but for the purpose of telling this story, now it is, who was one of the nurses who worked on the floor with me. I heard, I saw, I, I, I felt like someone was watching me, I said, however, not directly replying to Darlene. When? Where? In the parking lot? At the pizza place? Asked Darlene. No, not at the pizza place, nor in the parking lot. I heard someone. I saw someone when 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 I went downstairs to the basement, and I said, as I tried to recall everything about what I heard, what I saw, what I felt when I was standing next to the vending machine in the dimly lit basement abandoned floor that used to be where patients were cared for. What? You went down to the basement? Why? How come? Asked Linda, a monitor tech who worked on the floor with me, whose job was to monitor and to analyze, among other things, a patient's heart rhythm when they were hooked up to the wires of an ECG monitor after I connected the adhesive electrodes to a patient's body. I heard something. I heard someone. A girl, crying when I was heading out to get the pizzas, when I was walking down the stairway. And then I attempted to explain again. However, yet again, the words to properly describe everything that I had seen, heard, felt escaped me. You heard someone crying? Who? Asked Darlene as she leaned against the desk next to mine at the nurse's station while she was still eating her slice of pizza. I, I, I don't know. I, I, I thought that it was a nurse, maybe from the ED, but, but the more that I think about it, I don't know. I don't know who it was. It didn't. I couldn't recognize their voice. All I heard was the echo of their voice, whoever they were, I said in a shrill tone of voice as I looked up and into the eyes of Darlene, and then into the eyes of Linda, who was now standing over me and staring at me. So, let me get this straight. You heard a voice in the stairway. You followed it down to the basement. You didn't see anyone, but you heard someone. And you said that you felt like someone was down there with you, right? Asked Linda as she looked directly at me, and while she took small bites of a slice of pizza from one of the pizza boxes that I had brought back with me from the pizza place. Uh-huh, I replied sheepishly as I looked up at her. I see. So, by the sounds of it, honey, it sounds like you had a close encounter with the one and the only Nora, said Linda with a wide-eyed smile as she stared at me with a distinctive jovial expression on her face. Who? I asked with a tone of confusion in my voice, because at that point, at least, I had never heard of anyone associated with the hospital called Nora, neither a patient nor an employee. You don't know who Nora is? No one told you about her when you first started here? Asked Darlene. No. Who? Who is she? I asked, as I turned and as I stared up at Darlene, who was still leaning against the desk to my right. You mean, who was she? Said Linda again, with a smile on her face. What? What do you mean? Who is she? Who was she? What? I don't understand, I asked, at the time unable to comprehend what Darlene and Linda were trying to convey to me. Nora, Nora is, Nora was, she used to work here, you could say. I mean, so the story goes. I never met her in person, of course, because when it is said that she worked here, I don't think I was even alive. But yeah, as far as I know, Nora was, she was, she used to work here as a nurse. She might have died here, I think. And she's still here, explained Darlene, who was probably in her mid-40s and had been working here for maybe 20 years by this point, and a lot longer than I and many of the other nurses and techs had. What? I shouted, which noticeably startled both Darlene and Linda, because I was not known to be so loud when I spoke. But I was genuinely shocked by what I had just heard, and quite frankly, I was struggling to make sense of what I had just heard. I can't believe nobody told you. Yeah, Nora used to work here, and now she haunts the halls of the hospital and tends to scare the living daylights out of you CNAs from time to time, especially those who work on the night shift. And she is usually found downstairs where nobody goes anymore. She, she's kind of an inside joke of the hospital. A little secret that only the doctors, the nurses, the CNAs, and the techs who work here or used to work here know about. She's a legend around these parts, explained Darlene. Really? I asked, completely stunned because of what Darlene had just told me, essentially that the hospital was haunted by a ghost. Oh, yeah, Yeah. You mean you've never seen or heard the doors of the elevators open, but you never see anyone get off them? It happens all the time. Yeah. That's 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 Nora. She walks around the hospital, she rides the elevators, and she has even been known to have been seen by the patients sitting on their beds. Some even say that Nora speaks to them if they are awake through the night. She, Nora, she's always being seen and heard walking around. Even I have seen her, said Linda, as she stooped down to my left and she put her right arm around my shoulders. But how? Why? How come I'm just hearing about her? I asked as I looked at Linda. And then the charge nurse, Carla, walked up to the nurse's station and immediately took her own slice of one of the pizzas that I had bought. Now, what are you girls talking about? Asked Carla with a smile as she walked over to where Darlene, Linda, and I were huddled together. Nora, said Darlene and Linda simultaneously. Oh, okay, replied Carla with a smile. How come? What's she done this time? Oh, nothing. It's just that Susie here has just had her first close encounter with her. She's a little shaken up by the look of it, said Linda, as she stood up and met Carla's eyeline. Really? You never saw Nora before tonight? Wow. Well, I guess such a thing would shake me up too the first time. The next time you see her, though, you won't be as shocked. Believe me. I've had my own share of close encounters with Nora since I have been working here, let me tell you, said Carla. But don't worry, she's harmless. She, I guess she just worked here so long that she never wants to leave. That's what I reckon anyway. By this point, I felt like I was sitting in the middle of a storm as the world swirled around me like the wind of a twister, because I was shocked, I was surprised, I was confused, and I could not believe that where I worked was really haunted. Naturally, for the rest of the night, I could not stop thinking about what Darlene, Linda, and Carla had said to me. And of course, I could not stop thinking about Nora and wondering who she was. The rest of the night went even slower than usual, and when I attended to and assisted all the patients on the floor that night, I was more like a robot going through the motions, secretly hoping that time would race by, the sun would rise, and I would get to go home and go to bed. And somehow I could find a way to either forget or live with the fact that the hospital where I worked was haunted by a ghost called Nora. Well, the morning did come, the sun did rise, and eventually I and everybody on the night shift with me were able to clock out, leave work, and go home. However, when I finally did get home, which I have absolutely no recollection of how I did that, even though I did in fact drive myself home, I climbed into bed while still wearing my scrub top and my scrub pants, and I just laid there underneath the covers waiting to fall asleep. However, unfortunately, sleep never came. Not immediately, at least. And for several hours after my night shift had ended and I had got home, I could not for the life of me fall asleep because I could not stop thinking about Nora. I have no idea when I did in fact fall asleep that morning, afternoon, but soon enough my alarm was going off on my phone and I was being awoken by Bon Jovi's In These Arms, which meant, of course, that in a few hours I would have to get up and go back to work and start another night shift at the hospital, the haunted hospital where I worked, which the prospect of I was still feeling uneasy about. I mean, I like scary movies. I like the thrill that I felt while being on a roller coaster going fast. But but knowing that the place where I worked was really haunted made me feel anxious because the reality of the supernatural felt even more real to me than it had ever done so before. That night, I returned to work. I drove to the hospital. I parked in the same parking space where I normally parked. I walked in through the main entrance. I went to one of the working elevators that I knew would take me to the med-surg floor where I worked to see where I was going to be that night. Then, after I was told that I would be sitting with a patient that night, I put my purse in the break room and then I proceeded back to the nurse's station to see which patient I would be sitting with, what room they were in, and what they had been admitted to the floor for, like I usually did when I found out that I was going to be sitting with a patient. Then I went to the room where the patient I was to be sitting with that night was lying in bed. I introduced myself to the patient, and then I sat down on the chair in the patient's room and I began to talk to them and to listen to them, all the while attempting to take my thoughts away from the name that continued to ring in my head. I sat listening and talking to the patient who I was sitting with for perhaps 5 minutes before I heard the bell sound of one of the elevators reaching the med-surg floor, the doors of which were right outside the patient room of the female patient I was sitting with, and the same elevator that was supposed to be not in use. And when I heard it, I immediately stopped listening, stopped talking, and I focused all my attention on the left-hand side elevator that I could see into from where I was seated now that its door had opened. And what do you think I saw when I stared into the elevator? Huh? Yep, you guessed it. Nothing. No one. Because there was nobody there. Nobody was in the elevator. No one had called it. However, when I looked out into the corridor, I just knew with all that I was that there was someone out there, and it could only be one person: Nora.